Welcome. I'm so excited to have you in my Real Talk podcast because I read your bio and I introduced you, and what an amazing introduction. I'm going to jump right in and ask you, well, tell us, what do you do on your own word a little bit?
Well, I developed the Inspired Performance Institute a number of years ago as a result of doing research to help my daughter and my wife who had experienced childhood trauma. And what I had found is that most of the solutions were all managing, coping, and living with the effects of it. So whether they had anxiety or whatever they were dealing with, it was all coming down to management. And what I said is, I think we need to fix this, not manage it. So I started
Mm,
doing a lot of research. And what I discovered is that when we have unresolved trauma compromises the immune system and the neurotransmitters. So people, if the immune system is compromised, you're going to get sicker. And if your
mm,
neurotransmitters are compromised, you're going to feel bad because you're not getting the serotonin, dopamine, GABA in order to keep that in regulation. And that trauma keeps on looping. So what I discovered is that when we resolve the trauma and we could get an update, our minds, I say that all we need is a reboot. We just got to
mm.
reboot the computer and you're on top of your shoulders. When we do that, performance goes up. So the reason I called this a performance program and not trauma therapy is because I start from the premise that there's nothing wrong with anybody, that everybody's mind is perfectly fine. However, everybody is being affected differently by some events and experiences that they've had throughout their lifetime. That is having an effect on your ability to stay present and in the moment, and we can fix it.
Wow. So, is it safe to say that this, and I'm going to ask you what inspired you to do this, but it's like a little bit personal for you because your daughter and your wife, and that was kind of like you were going through that. Not only you did it because of teaching other people, but just to see them and going through that, it's kind of like a personal to you that to study a little bit more and find out what is exactly that mean and how we have to manage it. So, what inspired you besides like your family? What inspired you to choose this career?
Well, again, really was because I met my wife and I realized she was living in a very different household that I grew up in. Very traumatic father, very traumatic childhood. Now she's high functioning, so if you had met her, you wouldn't necessarily know it. And one of the things that I find fascinating is so many people that I meet who have gone through those kinds of childhood will not want to talk about it. There's a shame and guilt that comes along with it that they just would rather not talk about it. My wife that was true to her too. She swore me to secrecy. I don't want anybody to know about my childhood. And so that never made sense to me, but I thought my wife was the anomaly. I
Mm.
didn't realize that my life was the anomaly. I was the one living in a unique situation that I didn't have any trauma. I had these amazing parents that kept my system, my nervous system, regulated. And so because of that, I've been healthy all my life. And so when I saw my wife dealing with hers, I realized, okay, I tried everything I could do to try to help her, but nothing seemed to really work. And as
Mm.
an example, even though we were doing very well financially, we had three beautiful children, everything's going along, she wasn't really enjoying it. She was always waiting for something to go wrong. It would always be, but what if this happens? And then what if that happens? And what I didn't realize that as a child, she had learned that because if things were going okay with dad for a little while, they could stop in an instant and change. So
Right.
she was waiting for that same thing in our lives to happen. Something's going to go wrong. This doesn't last.
Right.
And then when my daughter was diagnosed with Crohn's at 14, she also developed another autoimmune disorder called idiopathic pulmonary hemosiderosis, which is a lung disorder.
Right.
And what I did is I connected up through my research that I believed that that trauma was affecting their health. My wife had Hashimoto's, another autoimmune. My daughter has two autoimmune disorders. And what I believe is that was connected to that. And then I started meeting a lot of people, and it really developed our passion that we really believe that we can help a lot of people who are struggling because they're not getting answers. The only answers they're getting is, you have anxiety? Okay, well, we'll medicate you, or we'll teach you how to live with anxiety and manage your anxiety. And I just don't believe that that's a really good solution.
Oh my God, it's so amazing that you shared this with us because I experienced trauma as a childhood. You know, like I left my country and I came over here with no friend, family, no education, no money, no nothing, completely like in a country that I didn't know nothing about.
Right.
And at first, obviously, I for the longest time I didn't think I experienced trauma.
Yep.
I wasn't aware of it. I was not aware of it that I have it. But then, like you said, the symptoms show up. And after when I got my life together and I have my daughters and I'm healthy and I'm, making money and everything is okay. But it's still, I love the way that you said that because a lot of people probably feel that you still, there's something's wrong. There's something's coming up. Like you're waiting
Yes.
for something, but you don't know what that is. And
Yep.
for the longest time, I thought that was way of life,
Exactly.
our parents are telling us, okay, well, hope for the best, be prepared for the worst, and all that stuff. Till I find out that no, that is part of the trauma going, to adulthood, and that your head is like that set up that way, that always you're waiting for something to go wrong, otherwise you're not safe or you're not okay, which is connected to depression, stress, and all the other names that they give it. But I never spoke about my trauma. I never knew I even had a trauma. I thought that was life is. So, with that being said, a lot of people going through these things in their life but they don't think it's a trauma. So what is a trauma and how somebody can actually find out, that the symptom is from the trauma?
Great question. What happens is a lot of people know what a big T trauma is, the big things like a sexual assault,
Right.
an accident, things like that. And those are obvious traumas. But I wrote my second book is called Emotional Concussions. And I wrote that because they're not all big T traumas. It could be living with a alcoholic parent who was very abusive, right? So they may have raised you okay, but whenever they got drunk, maybe that's when you saw all the abuse come in. Or you could have had a coach or a teacher that told you you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, right? All those kinds of things accumulate, just like a physical head concussion. If
Mm,
somebody has one concussion, they'll have certain symptoms.
right.
If they have 4 or 5 concussions, they're going to get worse. And so I
Mm,
say we can also get that emotionally. We can get those kinds of emotional concussions that can accumulate. So if you live like my wife is a perfect example. She had both physical and emotional trauma. A
right.
parent that was constantly telling her that, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough. And then at the same time saying, oh, you're so beautiful. And then at the same time putting her down constantly. So those emotional concussions. So when I met my wife, I mean, she's beautiful. I mean, she's a model,
Right.
right? But she could tell you everything that was wrong with her and how she wasn't beautiful. You know,
Oh,
because of growing up in that world where she just didn't know what to believe. And like you said, you may not have recognized some of those emotional concussions until a little bit later. They start showing up in symptoms.
mm,
So for my wife, it ended up with Hashimoto's, a thyroid disorder,
wow.
and just that fear, constantly living in fear. And no matter what I said, I could never calm it down. I would
Right.
say, like, I'm not sure why you're not experiencing the life that I'm experiencing. I'm enjoying life with you. We've got beautiful children. We've got a beautiful home. We have our ups and downs like
Right.
any couple, any business will have. But on the overall, it's a pretty good life.
Right.
And yet she didn't know why. She would just
Wow.
go, I don't know. I don't know what it is. But I now know what it was. It was that
Right.
her mind was preparing her to not get too excited about things going well because there's going to be a disappointment at some point. It's going to come crashing down. The rug's going to get pulled out from under you. So she didn't know that that's what was happening. But now I truly see that that's happening. I had a lady come in, very successful professional athlete husband. Her husband was a famous professional athlete. So she's got everything going for her, but dealing with a whole bunch of physical issues that she was dealing with as well as emotional. And again, her
Mm,
husband was doing the same thing, like, we're very successful. We've got everything going for us. What is it about this kind of a life that's not making you happy? She didn't know either.
mm,
But once I explained what happened to my wife, she was like, oh, this is making so much. That's exactly me. I
mm,
never knew why. It's because the trauma is looping and
right.
keeping her in an active flight or fight stage. That's happening
Wow.
constantly. So if your mind is feeling that you're not safe,
Mm,
it's not going to do a lot of maintenance. It's more
right.
focused on survival. And so then that's why people start to get sicker and their immune systems are compromised. And it's going to show up somewhere in your life. And just like I think you mentioned, symptoms start showing up.
Right, 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 right. Well, yeah, for me did, but like you said, trauma, big trauma, somebody in your close family, God forbid, dies. Yeah, I had my child died when he was born, and then he died at the age of 3 months. Those type of trauma that is like fire, or somebody's getting sick, getting diagnosed by cancer, things like that is really like big headline that, okay, I've been through trauma. My mother died in a young age, or my father molested me, or something like that is like, okay, that is noticeable. But I love the way you said that is the little thing that we don't recognize that is trauma. And then I was one of the example of that. But then you go to the doctor and immediately they diagnose you as you're depressed, you have panic attacks, you're stressed, you're overwhelmed, go exercise, do this, eat healthy, and you will feel better. But you're doing all of that maintenance, like, just society expectation of going to the gym, exercising, eating healthy, drinking a lot of water, meditating. But the problem is still there. All
Yes.
we're doing is medicating ourselves to numb that feelings and not feel it. So that would it safe to say self-image is one of the things that you might have had a trauma in the young age, and now you're feeling that way about yourself, right?
Exactly. So all those little things that are built up and accumulated over that period of time your mind continues to use those as resources and references. What do we know about the way we respond to a certain situation? And that's why people see, and so when people come into me and say, I have depression, I have anxiety, I have whatever, I say, you don't have that. That's a symptom.
Right.
That's not what you have, right?
Mm.
It's your mind is responding for a particular reason to a set of experiences that you've had. And all we have to do is get to the root of it, right?
Right, right,
And once we get to the root, we can then fix it. But if we just treat the symptoms, we're never fixing it.
right.
And the way they treat the symptoms is generally medication, or we're going to, go out and exercise, meditate, do all those kinds of things, and they help, right? But they're not fixing the problem. So
Yeah.
if you went to your dentist and you had a toothache,
Mm.
and so your dentist sat down and says, oh, I'm going to take this needle, I'm going to numb it,
Right,
right? So you don't feel the pain. And
right,
now I'm going to give you a brochure on how to live with toothaches. And you're going to manage the toothaches for the rest of your life, right? You would
right,
say, no, I'm going to find a dentist. I want the tooth out or fixed, right?
right, right,
But for mental health, we seem to accept that. Oh, I
right,
have to live with anxiety all my life? Yes. Right? No, you don't.
right.
It's a symptom.
So that brings me to my next question. Like, okay, so do you actually use the word trauma when a client comes into you and see you for the first time? What do you say to them? How does the process goes? Do you use the word trauma? How the whole thing work? Because me, I didn't know I had a trauma. So how do you see your clients talking to you, and what is your response to them for the first time when you see them?
Well, the very first thing I say to them is I'll say to them, can you tell me first what you're dealing with? Like, what have you been experiencing? And that's when they'll come out with, I have anxiety, I have whatever. And
Oh,
then I'll say, so let me explain this. There's nothing wrong with you,
okay.
and there's nothing wrong with your mind. Your mind works perfectly fine. However, your mind has been affected by some events and experiences in your life that's interfering with your ability to stay present and in the moment. And we're going to fix that. So
Mm,
that will allow you to stay present and in the moment. And when I say that, that's sort of, it's like, yeah, but so I had one lady, she spends about 15 minutes telling me a whole bunch of things that have happened to her.
right,
And so when I was finished, I said to her, I says, do you have anything else? And she looks at me sort of surprised and goes, well, that was a lot, don't you think?
right, right, right.
And I said, oh, yeah, that was a lot. I says, however, for the last 15 minutes, I've learned a lot about what happened to you, but I haven't learned anything about you yet.
Wow,
Right? Because that became her identity. I'm this,
wow,
I'm that, I'm whatever. And I'm saying, no, that's just what happened to you. That's not who you are. That's not what is controlling your life. You've got symptoms because of that. So
right,
all we have to do is get your mind. See, the glitch comes in. We all have these glitches. It's just like a computer.
right,
The glitch comes in is that your survival brain, your subconscious mind, operates in the present.
right.
So it's fully present all the time. It's only our conscious mind that about 5% of your brain is controlled by your conscious mind. That's your ability to use reason and logic. Now, that is not in charge of survival.
Mm,
So if there's a survival threat, your subconscious mind, your survival brain is taking over running the show.
right.
Can you see now where a glitch is going to come in? If you've stored information about an event and experience 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and
Mm,
if your mind starts looking at the information about that event, when does your survival brain actually think that information is happening?
now.
Right now. And is going to create a response to it because it thinks there's a threat. But there's
Right.
no threat, it's information about a threat. So a great way for me to explain it, like how do you know whether or not you have trauma, is I'll say, can you tell me about an event or an experience in your lifetime that when you think about it, you feel an emotion?
Mm,
Because what I say to them is, if you feel an emotion, your mind is calling for an action. The purpose of fear is to escape a threat. The purpose of anger is to attack a threat. So if I
mm,
think about something that happened to me 10 years ago and my heart starts pounding, right? What is my mind saying? Do something.
right, right, right,
About what? There's
right.
nothing to do anything about. It's just
Right,
information, but my mind doesn't know that because it's seeing it in real time.
right,
It's a glitch. And so that is news for a lot of people. They've never heard it explained that way. And it makes
right.
perfect sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to get your mind to update so that
Mm,
it can still recall that data, but it's not going to call for the action. It's that
right.
simple. We can fix it that fast.
So it's almost like a people living in their past. Like you keep bringing those memories and functioning from the past, not so much from the present moment, what they see right now. And 5% is very little compared to survival brain. That if you're giving information from the past, especially if something dramatic, it's you pretty much living from that emotion and your body is reacting to it until, God forbid, something happened physically that you're really aware, like autoimmune system or something like, oh, what happened here, right?
Right. So the mind is actually continuing to loop through that traumatic memory.
Okay.
Every time it sees it, remember your subconscious mind, right? Survival based is in
Mm,
the moment. So if it's seeing the information from 10 years ago, it's responding now. So
right.
everything for your subconscious is now. That's a glitch.
Mm.
And the reason that happens is because your subconscious mind is constantly doing Google searches. That's the way I explain it.
Right, right,
What do
right.
we know about this new information that's coming in? So if you're sitting there talking to somebody, right, and there's a noise that happened at a point, maybe a loud noise comes up. There's where post-traumatic stress comes in.
Mm.
Somebody, a veteran, hears something fall in the background or a door slam. Why do they get that response? Because their subconscious mind did a Google search. What does that sound like? That sounds like the bomb, right? So it starts looking for information about bombs and starts pulling in a whole bunch of data, right,
Right.
about bombs. And then as soon as it starts looking at the data, it starts responding to it.
Wow.
And because it's being stored in high definition, high resolution, very bright, very intense,
Mm.
what I do is I take you through a process that we can basically get your mind to reset that. And
Mm.
here's the best way to explain it. If I asked you what you ate for dinner last night, can you tell
Mm.
me what you ate for dinner?
Yes.
What'd you
I had
have?
salad and a salmon.
Right. So when you look back and watch this video, you'll see that you looked up, right?
Yes.
And when you looked up, you saw pictures, right, of what you ate,
Yes. Yes.
right? That's how you stored the information about dinner last night. Now,
Right.
because it wasn't threatening or disturbing, it was stored as a fairly low resolution file, not a ton of information taken in because your mind wasn't feeling a threat.
Right. Right.
Now, if you have an event that's threatening, right, and you're in the middle of that, now you're recording tremendous amounts of detail. Every single sound, smell, it's taking in a lot of data. So what it's doing is it's recording that event in high definition, very bright and intense. What I'm able to do is take you through a process of 2 or 3 of those kinds of events
Mm.
and get your mind to reprocess that into the same format as to what you ate for dinner last night. And then it
Wow.
stops calling for the action because it doesn't see the intensity to it. It doesn't activate the nervous system. And it's that simple, not fast.
maybe simple, but for somebody to process that on their own is a lot of work, and we don't really always aware of ourselves to say, okay, well, this is connected to that, because you has to kind of like a pause and say, wait a minute, this is what it is. Now you have a method that TIPP, right?
Yep.
Tell
Yep.
us a little bit about that. What is that?
The process I developed is basically a 4-hour program that I take you through. The
Mm-hmm.
first hour and a half approximately is spent on education and science about what I learned. Because when you understand that there's nothing wrong with you, right? And I can explain the science behind what is anxiety, what is depression, what is panic attacks,
Mm,
and why it's actually happening. The thing that I get all the time is people are like, wow, that makes so much sense,
mm,
right? So once you understand the science behind it, it's much easier then to see how we're going to get to the solution. And
mm,
so I said, you just need a reboot. All that high definition data that's being stored just needs to get reprocessed.
mm,
So then the next about hour and a half is going to be spent on getting now the processing started. We're going to look at maybe 3 events, and I'm only looking for a highlight reel.
mm,
So I'm not looking for us to sit and describe in great detail what happened to you. What I'll say is just like a movie trailer,
mm-hmm.
give me a 2 to 3 minute little trailer, right, of what happened to you.
Right.
Now, we can do it where you can talk about it, and I'll run you through a certain technique. One will do it just visually, so I have no idea what the event is. Or the
Right.
third way is I'll have you tell me in a new language. And the new language is called flowing. And
Mm,
there's only one word in the flowing language, and it's flowing. So
mm,
instead of saying, I walked into the room, you would say flowing, flowing, flow. Every word's flowing. The advantage to that, if I work with somebody who's had to say a sexual assault or a rape,
right.
the last thing they want to do is sit there and start describing that in detail. So I'll say, tell me what happened in flowing. As you're saying, I have no idea what you're telling me, and it's not important for me to know.
Ah,
Once you're staying flowing for about 2 or 3 minutes, looking at the memory, I then run you through the process and the mind resets it. And so we'll do about 3 of those events. Once we finish those, then I'm going to get you into the next one is we're going to start working on performance. The mind will start reprocessing all that old data, and now we want it focused on performance. And then I show
mm,
you the tools and the techniques to get your mind to perform at its optimal level.
mm,
So I work with executive CEOs, I work with world-class athletes. I've had athletes, Marco Cicchetto, after going through our program, broke the world record in
mm,
marathons as an amputee. Rob Killian won the Spartan World Championships. Tim Burke won the long drive championships as a golfer. The
ah,
idea is being able to keep them present allows them to perform at a higher level.
wow.
And that, so the TIPP process is 4 hours, and then you listen to a series of audios for the next 30 days.
Right.
And in those 30 days, the audios are about 10 to 12 minutes a day. They
Mm.
just reinforce the 4-hour session and strengthen it.
Right, right. So it's almost like you reprogramming their brain, like the things that was not necessary to be stored, and it's you out of it. They don't know they're out of it, but you're saying it's there, but it's not necessary to keep bringing it up and wasting your energy and time thinking about it because there's no benefit to it. So you're almost like speaking the mind language to be in present moment and focus on the things that is important to you right now. What happened to you in childhood is gone, is done.
It's just information.
It's
There's
just
nothing happening. And so they can talk about it. So I worked, the most dramatic one was a U.S. Army sniper who had to
okay.
shoot and kill a 12-year-old boy.
Oh
So when he
God.
first sat down talking to me, he was just sobbing. He says, I can't do this anymore. I've been, living with this for 8 years. He said, all they want to do is ask me to talk about it every time I come in. He says, I can't talk about this anymore. And I said, well, here's the good news. I'm not going to need you to talk about it at all. I said, we're just going to get it fixed.
Right.
By the time I was finished, he could talk about it. He told me the entire event without shaking and crying and said, how the bleep, I won't say that word, how
Yeah,
the
right.
bleep did you do that? And I
Right.
said, I didn't do anything. I says, for 8 years, your mind has been trying to get you not to pull the trigger. It's been calling for an action. Is that action possible? No. But your mind doesn't know that. So it's
Right.
been trying to help you and protect you by getting you not to pull the trigger 8 years ago. Because it thinks 8 years ago is now when it looks at the information in the memory. It's a
Right.
glitch, and we can fix it. Does
Because the
that make
brain,
sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's such a sad story too, because 12 years old and walking around with that guilt, alone. It's just such a bag of guilt you're carrying with you, which is heavy on you. And it's like you don't have nobody to talk to. You feel like people don't understand you and all that. And I can so relate when it comes to talking about it. There's certain stuff I'm like, I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Right.
I was living with a husband that was very abusive emotionally and physically. So every time I talk about it for days and days, I have dream about it.
Sure. Yeah.
I have dream about it, and I'm like, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Like, I just wanted to put that the past behind and move forward. So I totally understand what you're saying, because then I did a lot of study like yourself, and I learned that the brain cannot differentiate between past, present, and the future.
Right.
It's right here. What you're doing, what you're thinking, the emotion comes in, brain thinks, well, we're here. This is what we're gonna do, and that's it. And this is why I was so excited to have you and my podcast, because in today's society, now everybody, I mean, we went through a lot because of the pandemic and all of it.
Sure.
But there's a lot of people that are going through stress and going through anxiety. So they have no clue, and they're just kind of like making it their identity, like you mentioned. Like, oh, I'm stressed, oh, I'm depressed, but they're not feeling good about themselves. So if they had to ask you a question, Dr. Wood, how do we have to recognize that this is something from the past, and what is they can do on their own to just get that identity, kind of like, okay, I'm not that, I'm this, and then after that they can go for help.
Well, number one, obviously, you have to get that resolved, because if you don't get it resolved, everything else is managing it. So you can, if you want some temporary relief, do the things that we were talking about a little earlier, is the
Right,
meditation, the yoga, the exercise. Those kinds of things are helping, and they're obviously better than just medication. But
right,
if you're really struggling, medication may temporarily help you through something. I just don't believe it should be a lifestyle. So many people, they come to see me and they've been on anxiety medication for 10 years, and I'll say, like, why would we want to do that?
right,
Or they'll say to me, I have really bad anxiety, and I'll say, well, you're on medication? Yes. So you're on medication and you have really bad anxiety? Yes. How's the medication helping?
right,
It's not. Oh, it would be worse if I wasn't on the medication. That's where they get into that conditioning, that I need this in order to help me. The
right.
mind and body are designed to heal. All we have to do is get to the root of what's interfering with it healing. And as long as it's feeling stressed, it's going to want to do little maintenance. It's more focused on survival than it is on maintenance. Makes
Hmm.
sense? So the
Yes.
idea is you can do some things to help do a little bit of that maintenance, like we said, the
Hmm.
yoga, meditation, things like that. But the key is to get that trauma updated and resolved. That's life changing. So my
Right.
daughter, I told you, who had Crohn's, hasn't had a Crohn's flare-up ever since.
Wow.
Now that doesn't mean everybody who has Crohn's is it's coming from trauma, but for my daughter, I don't think there's any question it was, right?
Right, right,
Because there's
right,
no
right.
other reason why her Crohn's would stop. So
Right.
the idea is to find what is creating the issues. And like I said, we don't need to do every trauma. We only do 2 or 3. The mind will actually start to reset all that old trauma. It's
Mm.
pretty amazing.
Right. So to diagnose ourselves, and like without making it our identity, saying that doctor, or I have anxiety, I'm taking the pill, the pills are not working. If somebody's listening to you right now and saying that, well, my life is okay, but sometimes I feel like, what are some symptoms that they're feeling that you should kind of like a warning to them to say that, hey, like, listen to your body, listen to yourself before you jump in to go to the doctor or take medication. Like if somebody's starting to develop that kind of feelings. Because the reason I'm asking you, I mean, you spoke before, like when I stopped smoking, I was getting this feeling, and it was very unusual feeling for me. And I'm like, but I was so aware of my body. I was doing all the other stuff. So I was like, this is coming from cigarette, or this is coming from menopause, or this is the. So some people are so busy in life, they pass this first feelings of the uncomfortability, but then they accept, okay, I have anxiety. I'm like depressed. So give us some diagnosis. How can we recognize that we are going in a direction that we have to stop and watch ourselves and say, hey, you need help, or you need to do something about that?
Well, especially if you have, I talk a lot about with people who have addictions, whether they're alcohol, drug abuse, even cigarettes.
Mm,
The reason they're doing those things is because they're trying to feel better.
right.
It has nothing to do with their character or willpower or morals or strengths, right? It's not about willpower. It's about wanting to feel better. So
Right.
if you have any of those kinds of behaviors, right, obviously there's a reason why you do, right? So those are things. If you think about things or you can't talk about your childhood or you can't talk about some events that happened to you as a child without crying or breaking down, that tells you that there's an unresolved trauma. My wife never wanted to talk about it. She swore me to secrecy. Don't ever tell anybody about this. The reason she did that is because she knew if she tried to talk about it, it would create all these emotions. So she
Right.
was trying to protect herself. Um, I worked with a lady who was a coach for women. She held retreats, did all these things. And when she sat down with me, she says, I feel like a fraud because I'm an imposter because I've had childhood trauma, but I never share it with anybody. She says, so I'm coaching all these women and I feel like I'm a really good coach. She says, but then I feel like I'm not really being honest with them and telling them I had the same things that they're telling me about. She says, because if I try to talk about it, I'll just fall apart.
Wow.
And so anyway, after she went through our program, I met her about 3 months later at another conference. She said to me, she goes, this was amazing. I got to share something. She goes, I was doing a retreat. And she says, and after going through your program, she says, I definitely felt better. She says, but during the retreat, she says, I was standing there doing this one presentation and I realized I've just shared a whole bunch of my childhood trauma. I didn't
Wow.
even realize I was doing it, right?
Mm.
Because the mind was no longer feeling that fear. All that shame and guilt about it was gone. So she was able to
Right.
share. My wife now will talk to you, no problem about it.
Right. Right.
She couldn't have done that before
Right.
because the mind would try to protect her.
Wow. Wow. That's so amazing because subconsciously we don't even know it, right?
Don't even know it. She had no idea she's even talking about it. But all of a sudden now, that fear of talking about it had just gone away. And so
Mm.
all of a sudden now she was able to talk about it without even. So if you've walked with a sprained ankle for 20 years and
Mm.
then we do something to heal it,
Mm.
now when you're walking, somebody goes, well, Valerie, you're not limping. You go,
Right.
oh, I'm not? Oh, I didn't realize I wasn't limping. Did I really limp
Right.
before? Because now it feels normal not to limp, right?
Right.
But
Right.
if you've limped
Right.
for 20 years, that felt normal. So if you've
Wow.
been living with these things for a long time, you may not even recognize that it's having an effect on you. So the way
Right.
to do that is to check in. Do I have some things that are affecting my health? Like my daughter with Crohn's or my wife with Hashimoto's, especially autoimmune. Specifically look for a lot of autoimmune issues,
Right.
colitis, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, things like that. Um, and then also look for if I can't talk about things that have happened earlier in my life, or I get really. I was sitting at a conference one time and there was a motivational speaker, and you know what they typically do in those, they get you up and then bring you down and get you up and get you
Right.
down,
Right. Right. Right.
right? Well, she was crying like constantly, and I said to her, I says, I notice you're crying a lot. She goes, yes, I'm just a very emotional person. And I said, yeah, I could
Ah.
see that. And I says, how would you like to fix that?
Right.
She
Right.
goes, well,
Right.
I've been emotional all my life. And I says, you've had a lot of trauma. She goes, oh, you have no idea how much trauma I have. I said, well, I pretty much do. I said, because that's why you're crying all the time. I
Right.
says, how would
Right.
you like to get that fixed? And we took some time after the conference and it took her through the program and it was life changing. All of a
Wow.
sudden now she could sit through this and enjoy the conference without it activating her nervous system.
Wow.
Amazing, right?
I'm just amazed by your work and you hear things like this and you say to yourself, I mean, I experienced all of this and I got help and I totally understand and relate to what you're saying, that a lot of time what keep us from all of this is just our identity. Oh, this is who I am, that myth that we carry with us, that I'm an emotional person, or I don't like I don't look good, or I'm tall, or I'm short, or I'm fat. I'm just as my gene, as my background. We accept those negative thoughts and it goes with us. And the way you crack it down and say, hey, that's not your real identity. Yeah, like
Right.
you said, I love when you said that's something happened to you, but that's not you now. Because as we grow, we change. As we get older, or as we see places and think, our mind got to have new information,
Right.
right?
And we put labels. Not only do we put labels on, but people put labels on us. So I had a lady come in who had been in drug addiction. She was on heroin. And
Oh,
so
Jesus.
she'd been in for 7 years seeing a therapist for her heroin addiction.
Right.
So when she first sits down with me, she sits down and she says, I talked to my therapist about coming to see you, and he says, I have to tell you up front and be honest that I have self-destructive behavior. And so I just smiled at her and I says, really, what would make you think you're self-destructive?
Right.
And she was shocked. She goes, well, I'm sticking a needle in my arm with heroin. Don't you think that's self-destructive?
Right.
And I
Right.
said something to her she'd never heard before. I said, no, I don't think that's self-destructive. I think you
Right.
did that because you wanted to feel better. And I'll bet
Right.
you when you stuck the needle in your arm, you felt better. She
Um,
goes, yeah. And I said, that's not self-destructive. I says, now the substance you're using is destructive,
right.
but you're not destructive. If you wanted to
Mm.
self-destruct, you could have done that. I believe that the reason you're using heroin is because you found a resource to stop the pain temporarily.
Mm.
That's all it is. So if we can fix the pain, there's no need for the heroin.
Mm.
And that's how we get people out of addiction.
You're so right, absolutely right. Because in the end of the day, if you ask the person, if people that are addicted to a lot of these things, in the end, they're still afraid of dying. They're still afraid of dying. They don't want to die, but they're like the fear. They know that that's damaging to their body. One day I'm gonna die, but right now the pain is a thing. Because if you don't want to die, then that's a temporary. You're getting rid of the pain, just to get rid of the pain, and then you're okay for a little bit, and then you go back to that, and that's your coping mechanism. Because when it
So,
comes to it, it's just
so when does the subconscious mind want the pain to stop? Now.
right.
It doesn't see consequences. It has no idea what a future is. It
Right,
has
right.
no idea what the past is. Everything it's experiencing is now. So why did people jump out of the building at 9/11?
Mm,
Because the pain was going to be so great that the mind came up with a way to stop that pain right now.
wow.
Jump out of the building.
Right.
Now, to the logical part of the mind, that makes no sense. If I
No.
jump out of this building, I'm going to die.
Die. Right.
But to the subconscious part of the mind, when did it stop the pain?
Right.
Right
When they
now.
die. Yeah.
Right? So jumping out of the building stops the pain right now. And
Wow.
that's all it's concerned with is right now. That's
Right.
why people get stuck in addiction, because the pain is so strong, whether they've had childhood trauma or something gone on in their life, they just can't deal with that pain. But
Right.
if they take a drug or they drink alcohol, they temporarily stop the pain.
Mm.
Then they start building that repetitive code that the mind now automatically says, if we feel that pain, what's the code we go to? The code is alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, right?
Right.
And it automatically defaults to that code. That's why they can't stop it. So the
Mm.
pain created the building of the code, and then the code continues to operate. Now that makes no sense to the logical part of the mind, but it makes perfect sense to the subconscious part of the mind. I
Wow.
solved the problem right now.
Right. I took care of you.
And that changes identity, because then it's like, well, I'm a weak person, And I know AA and NA have helped a lot of people, so I want to be respectful of what they've done. But I don't believe that people should be taught that they're broken and defeated. I don't believe that they should be told that they're going to be an addict for the rest of their life. I believe that they had an addiction problem, but it doesn't mean they're an addict forever.
Right.
We
Right.
can
Right.
fix it. We don't need
Right.
to live with it.
Dr. Wood, this was amazing. Thank you so much for giving us this amazing information, because especially right now, like I said, with the pandemic, with Corona, a lot of people are in high anxiety and depression, and they don't know, and they reflecting on themselves. They know themselves much better now than they did before. So that's why I was so excited to bring you in my podcast, because I want you to give them the perspective of this is a time to reflect on yourself, to know. Don't go by identity that you inherited from negative people, your family or your friends. Just look forward to now and the future, what you want it to be on your own term, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Thank you so much for
We're
having
designed
me.
to heal. We're
Yes,
designed to heal.
yes. You're doing such an amazing job. And so if somebody wants to connect with you, where they can find you, do you have a website? And I'm going to connect to social media, but
Yeah.
where
So
is
if
you?
you go to TIPP.com, so gettip.com, and then if you do /Malone, I
Mm-hmm.
think we're doing a special. You're going to get a chapter from one of my books. And then if you want to purchase a program, there'll be a discount on the program as well for any of your listeners. So
Oh, wonderful.
gettip.com/Malone, and then you can get the free download from the chapter of the book and any discounts.
Wow, that's amazing. By the way, I'm very interested into reading your book. So I'm all into that, and I love the way that you explain everything. But I will definitely bring you back when I read your book because I'm in the process of reading it. So,
Oh,
and
great.
we can talk about that absolutely. And thank you for taking the time and being here with us. Thank you
Well,
so
thank
much.
you. Thank you for the opportunity to reach your listeners and for all the work that you're doing to help people as well. So I love working with healers.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.